Uchenna Menes, Chief Market Analyst at Eagle Global Markets, now joins me for a focus on the global oil market. Uchenna, glad to have you on Open Exchange West Africa, as always.
Thank you.
So let's start by talking about the trends within the global oil industry. And the latest we are seeing now are direct impacts from the storm in the Gulf of Mexico. Speak to this.
The Gulf of Mexico, basically, there was a storm hitting its coast, and that has really pushed oil producers from the U.S. to kind of work with that disaster by lowering their production, and that's caused oil price to surge on the back of that.
So is this a matter of what the OPEC couldn't get the U.S. to take a position on or to agree with them to do? It's a force majeure, as you called it during our pre-chat, that has achieved this now.
OPEC has always been trying to get U.S. to the table, and U.S., right now in Washington, they are basically anti-OPEC. If they had their way, they would possibly just nullify whatever legislative power OPEC has in terms of controlling oil supply and other things. The U.S., Washington, wants oil price to be low. So OPEC wants oil price to be stabilized, basically higher, and Washington wants it low. So they would continue to push production to its peak to drive prices lower.
Whether or not this was achieved by force majeure, I'm talking about a reduction in oil production by the United States countries now. We have the fact that their crude inventories have been down for 4 consecutive weeks. What will this mean for the global oil market?
That would be OPEC getting a gift on a platter, basically. It's just going to help their cut. OPEC, if we go back, you will realize that for the past 2 years, OPEC has not actually been in control of oil prices, despite their supply quota, production quota they've looked to put out to its member countries. They've really not controlled oil prices. If we look at it from October 2016 to May 2019, Iran, Venezuela, and Angola have accounted for 3.1 million barrels cut per day, and that was involuntarily, not by OPEC's cut. The whole of OPEC is just 1.3. So they really have not been caught determining oil prices. In their last meeting earlier this month, at the point where they decided to extend cut all through to 2020, we saw price dip by 3%, showing how irrelevant the market is seeing their impact, really.
But, Uchenna, you and I know what the oil prices are to economies that are oil-producing and even non-oil-producing economies across the world. Should we begin to have conversations around the line of how do we strengthen OPEC? Or what other dynamics do you think should come into the equation at this point? We do need a regulator for the oil prices across the world.
Very valid question, and that's why in the last meeting they tried to sign off a new charter with OPEC Plus, which Russia is leading the pack, and that's because they realized that we really can't do this by ourselves. We need more hands on the table, and we just don't need more hands on the table by verbal communication and verbal agreement. We need you to be committed contractually, and that's why they signed off the new charter. So we believe the possibility of that taking into effect going forward, that the new charter might make things to be more holistic.
Now, I'll bring you back home first before we go back to the Federal Reserve's conversation, which is on the global scene. What do all of this interplay mean for the Nigerian oil sector?
If OPEC can achieve its efficacy, its impact, that is going to push price to the top side, and that's really, should I say, beneficial for Nigeria. And Nigeria is also struggling. Nigeria, since May, have not really been meeting its own production quota. In the last meeting, they've asked for some sort of waiver to increase production because we need oil prices to be at $60 per barrel. However, we also need to produce at 2.3 million barrels per day to meet up to balance this budget. So right now we're producing at 1.8. We should be 1.6 as demanded by OPEC. So we are in that place where we need the oil prices, we also need the production. So we'll need to find a balance with that.
So maybe at 66, the figures are still looking good for the Nigerian budget benchmark. But what will this mean for the local reserves?
So basically, for in terms of pricing, a higher price is going to bring in significant revenue. Really, that's basically how we're structured. That's how we've should I say, wired down our economy in terms of pricing. So we'll always want prices to be high at every point in time.
But you know, we're here talking the debate between OPEC and non-OPEC countries about oil production cuts, essentially. And here we are also facing local realities of the Nigerian oil sector, according to reports, losing as much as $12 billion annually to oil theft. And we've got stakeholders, on the other hand, asking for action. As someone who sees inside that sector, what nature of actions do you think might help to curb oil theft in country?
The issue is, if you have loopholes, people would always want to take advantage of that. So we have significantly majored our should I say, reliance on oil sales, and people, this thefts now have seen this as an opportunity to continue to find a shorter ways to generate income. So they have to be that infrastructure in place, they have to be that control, they have to be that regulation whereby things are actually being balanced to prevent things like this happening.
So with the new NNPC executives beginning work, we are beginning to hear some new information about the policy strategies that they will implement to revamp Nigeria's oil sector. Top on that list being, as at 24 hours ago, talks about the need to build new refineries. And I have seen the heat that conversation is causing. And I see that look on your eyes just now. So there have been talks in the line of focus on the non-functioning refineries, as opposed to build new ones.
I believe when you want to come into that office space, you want to give that, should I say, that empowering conversation that this is what we're going to do, this is what we'll do. But we know they're really all talks. All talks. We need you to implement these things. Everybody before you have said the same thing that you're saying.
So what team are you on? The pro build new refineries or pro just make the oil sector work? Whether you're going to build or you're going to make the ones working, the ones that we have functional. I recall earlier, years back, there were talks of concession in the refineries. Where did that go?
It's just what it is. We're not asking for too much. If we can just have 2 functioning refineries, the government will save billions of dollars. Just 2 functioning refineries, not just 2 functioning refineries. The government will save billions of dollars. You just need to close that supply chain. We'll get to produce the crude oil, export it, then import the refined products. Those monies are where we have those counterproductive effect, really. We need to close the supply. We need to own all of the supply chain, put it all oil, refine the products, and keep prices low for the average consumer in Nigeria.
So back to now, global dynamics impacting oil production in Nigeria as well as the oil industry across the world generally. So the Federal Reserves versus President Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Cuts reserves versus earlier arguments by the Feds for normalization, and then they've done a 360 degrees to listen to what President Donald Trump has said. What are the implications that emerging markets will get from this?
I would even say 720 degrees. They've done 360 and they did another 360.
Twice.
That's what they did, because this was the Federal Reserve that was looking to normalize across, compared to its counterparts, central banks. They've actually highlighted that they will look to hike interest rate 4 times this year. December, we had the last hike. In January, Powell said we'll have to hold. Now, from hold, it's like we'll need to consider cutting, and now we are now assured of a cut coming this July. And it just begs the question, because the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, always highlight that they are data dependent, but we've looked at it that really, what data are you depending on to make you cut interest rate? Now we're saying this is just an insurance cut, mainly like penny wise, pound foolish. And
penny-wise, pounds-foolish. Yeah, we'll have to bend the conversation here and see what direct impact this will have on emerging markets. Many thanks to you for your time on Open Exchange West Africa.